Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of BELSAT TV and TVP World, with reports and analysis from Belarus, Russia and Ukraine. I am Sergei Pelesa, and these are the stories. Will Russia really deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus?
Russia is well aware that the use of nuclear weapons will fundamentally change everything.
Is the Kremlin facing a conflict within its elites?
This is such a signal, an indicator of the absolute collapse of Russian statehood.
Why the wives of Russian military men put on uniforms for a photo shoot?
The wife of a soldier is not just a wife.
Vladimir Putin has announced that Russian nuclear weapons would be deployed on the territory of Belarus. It was stated that Alexander Lukashenko had asked for it himself. However, after Putin's statement on March 25, the Belarusian dictator was silent for almost a week. Nuclear weapons are perhaps the last argument that Russia can use, and even psychologically it is extremely effective. But is Putin really ready to entrust his Belarusian ally with nuclear weapons?
Putin's Russia made the most serious gesture regarding nuclear weapons since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. On March the 25th, Vladimir Putin announced that Russian tactical nuclear weapons would be placed on the territory of Belarus. It seems to be a response to Great Britain's intention to supply Ukraine with depleted uranium shells and the USA practice of placing nuclear weapons in allied states.
We agreed that we will do the same, and I want to emphasize this without violating our international obligations on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Lukashenko commented on the statement only a week later. He tries to present the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus as the factor contributing to the growth of his political role in the international arena. However, it is obvious that Putin won't provide the control of tactical nuclear weapons to Lukashenko, which means the deployment of nukes in Belarus requires the creation of a full-scale Russian military base for nuclear weapons to be stored and protected by the Russian military. This kind of preparation for the deployment of nuclear weapons hasn't been observed on the territory of Belarus yet.
After looking at Alexander Lukashenko, I think anyone will come to a conclusion that it's better not to trust such a person with nuclear weapons. Lukashenko announced long ago that it was such a mistake, such a grief for all of us, that nuclear weapons had been withdrawn from the territory of Belarus in the 90s. We remember how he literally clung to nuclear weapons, because Belarus was the first among other post-Soviet republics to start getting rid of nuclear warheads, but in the end, they were the last to dispose of them.
Putin's latest decision looks as if it was made at the request of the Belarusian dictator. The logical explanation of such a long silence by the Belarusian dictator could be that Putin's words are actually a bluff. Artificial threats can upset Lukashenko more than real intention to deploy tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus.
For Lukashenko, Russian nuclear weapons on the territory of the country are an additional guarantee of the regime's survival, that the Russians will support it in case of an internal crisis. But this is an illusion. Nuclear weapons don't protect against people's anger and popular protests. And even with Russian nuclear weapons, the regime will continue to be deprived of legitimacy.
But even if the warheads are not going to be transferred to the territory of Belarus, Putin's statement and the preparation of a storage facility in Belarus, which may be about to begin, already constitutes a political gesture and a way of intimidation. At the moment, the Lukashenko regime has two possible means of delivering nuclear weapons: Su-25 aircraft, modernized specially for this purpose last summer, and Iskander missile systems, provided by Russia in December 2022.
Obviously, the Russians are trying to influence us psychologically. They want us to be afraid of nuclear war, and, for example, to limit support for Ukraine or to limit support for the Belarusian opposition.
There is a reason why Belarus has been chosen for Putin's political gesture. This is a signal to bold Poland, which is constantly urging the West to increase its support for Ukraine. And of course, a signal to all of NATO that the confrontation is approaching a critical point for Russia and the West needs to reconsider its decisions.
Russia is in a difficult situation. Moscow is very afraid that NATO will continue to participate in the war, directly or indirectly. This is very dangerous for Russia, so it attempts to use nuclear weapons to moderate NATO policy.
In some scenarios, the use of nuclear weapons remains possible. First, according to Nikolai Sokov, we should expect the use of non-nuclear weapons on NATO territory, then nuclear tests, and finally a nuclear strike.
Russia is well aware that the use of nuclear weapons will fundamentally change everything. They are also cautious, but to say that they will never use nuclear weapons is simply stupid.
Meanwhile, in the game of Russian regime, Lukashenko can turn Belarus into a legitimate target.
A growing discontent can be observed in the media and military elites in Russia. Recently, a recording of a telephone conversation between a famous producer Iosif Prigozhin and an oligarch Farhad Akhmedov has been posted on the internet. They refer to Putin and the heads of the Ministry of Defense using derogatory terms. There is also another Prigozhin in Russia who is even more famous. His name is Yevgeny, the founder of the private military company called Wagner Group. He is also dissatisfied with the actions of the military officials. Because of them, his mercenaries are dying in the war.
In March, the media posted on the internet a telephone conversation between a famous Russian producer, Iosif Prigozhin, and an oligarch, Farhad Akhmedov. During the conversation, they cursed Putin and the entire leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense.
Пустышка, закомплексован и этот, и второй лилипуты, недоросшие, закомплексованные. Ненавидят, силовики все их ненавидят. Ну просто вопрос в том, что когда все это кончится.
It will end badly for both of them, says music critic and journalist Artemy Troitsky. Oligarch Akhmedov is a billionaire. In the list of the richest businessmen in Russia, he holds the 49th place. Now, he is under sanctions and cannot use his property abroad. Iosif Prigozhin is married to a pop singer Valeria. Apart from her music, he also produces several other projects. But the main share of his income comes from corporate parties for the people close to power. Now he will lose all that, says Artemy Troitsky.
They are 100% dependent on the state. After this conversation, poor Iosif Prigozhin will not be invited anywhere else. And he had patrons from the president's administration, oligarchs and security forces, but they will not invite him anywhere anymore, neither him nor his wife.
Iosif Prigozhin himself claims that the recording is not real. He says that it was the product of neural networks or a prank. But journalists from the independent media, Important Stories, found out that the recording was genuine. They refer to their anonymous sources in special services.
Всех подставил. Всех и вся, всю страну, весь народ. Прежде всего, он похоронил русский народ. Да, похоронил весь российский народ.
Another Prigozhin, the head of Wagner PMC, also often criticizes the Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu and chief of the general staff of the armed forces Valery Gerasimov. Yevgeny Prigozhin claims that the Ministry of Defense does not want to share armaments with the private military company Wagner. And because of this, his fighters who have been recruited from prisons and very often convicted of murders are killed.
Who is to be blamed for the fact that they died? Those who were supposed to decide on the issue of supplying us with a sufficient amount of ammunition are to be blamed. The final signature must be put either by Gerasimov or by Shoigu.
Yevgeny Prigozhin interferes with the Russian military elites. The army is poor and its supplies have been plundered. The military leadership does not benefit from Prigozhin showing the problems that exist in the army. So far, they can do nothing to Prigozhin. He is friends with Putin. Thanks to this, he owns the Concord Group of companies from the food sector. Since the beginning of the war, orders from the state have grown so much that they generated record-breaking profits.
The front will not collapse. Even if right today or tomorrow the armed forces of Ukraine surround Bakhmut and the Wagner Group, it will be unpleasant for the Russian command. But this is just another military episode. Nothing will happen. But the question is different. This is such a signal, an indicator of the absolute collapse of Russian statehood.
Recently, there has been news that Yevgeny Prigozhin, together with his mercenaries, would leave the battlefield. Prigozhin himself has denied this so far. He says that while the homeland is in danger, they will fight. But for the whole year of the full-scale invasion, Yevgeny Prigozhin's mercenaries could not boast about a single achievement, only the capture of villages where no one lives anymore.
Russian authorities have organized a photo project called Heroes' Wives. The aim of the project is to photograph women whose husbands are involved in the armed aggression against Ukraine. The women are wearing their men's dress uniforms with military decorations. The authorities think that it will boost patriotic sentiments in Russia.
In the hall of the City Palace of Culture in Khabarovsk, one of the largest political, educational, and cultural centers of the Russian Far East, preschoolers are offered to take up arms. The reason is the opening of an exhibition glorifying the war, Heroes' Wives. During the opening ceremony, the widows of contract soldiers killed during the Russian army's invasion of Ukraine are crying. They are quickly taken out of the room so as not to spoil the overall good image. The organizers explain that strong women are looking at the visitors from the photos.
I wanted to show the fragility of a woman. An unbearable burden falls on her shoulders, and in the form of such a massive uniform, to convey her feminine fragility, but at the same time the strength of her spirit, that she is the support of her man here while he is there.
The photo project was conceived last year in Samara by Yekaterina Kolotovkina, the wife of the commander of the Second Guards Army of Russia. She was the first to pose in her husband's uniform. The Kremlin liked the idea so much that it was decided to organize the exhibitions in all the regions of the country. In the instructions, it was said to position the action as an impulse of the soul of women supporting their military husbands. But not all project participants can accurately voice the instructions of Moscow PR specialists.
No, this is not a measure of support, a measure of support for our words and our prayers for them, so that everything is good, so that it all ends soon. That is, the wife of a soldier is not just the wife. Therefore, when you get married, you understand who you are marrying.
But no one dares to say directly that the invitation to the photo session came from the pro-government structures. Moreover, most of our interlocutors are ready to support the Russian president after the death of their husbands. In case of the loss of the war, such women would approve the use of the nuclear button.
Russia is a multinational country with its own values. These values must never fade. If the values that are inherent in our fatherland, our homeland, fade away, then there will simply be no world, no country.
None of these photographs indicates what a feat was accomplished by the women's husbands. Equally, it is not known officially how many Russians have died during the ongoing second year of aggression against Ukraine. The last time when the Russian Ministry of Defense provided such data was in September 2022. The department claimed that 6,000 Russian soldiers were killed. According to Western intelligence estimates, about 200,000 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded. Up to 60,000 of them could have died.
That's all for today in Eastern Europe Review. I'm Sergey Belsa. Thank you for being with us. Please keep watching TUP World and stand with Ukraine.